Welcome to the session Fallacies of Public Finance, critical examination of the claim that justification for taxation is that there is a market failure regarding public goods and externalities. This is part and parcel of something that is beloved of the mainstream economists. It's a thing called market failure. The main market failures, I'm going to be doing 3 out of 4 of them here, and I'll be doing one in a future session. The main market failures, as far as I can see, are income distribution. Namely, we don't have perfect equality of income or wealth, and that's a market failure because we should. Another one is externalities, both positive and negative, and a third one is public goods. The fourth one that I won't cover now, but I will cover in a subsequent session, is monopoly. Those are the 4 biggies. But there are zillions of others. I mean, the way to get your reputation now as a PhD economist is to come up with a new market failure. And the American Economic Review seems to be full of nothing but new market failures, very exotic things. I should have a list of them, but they're really weird things. Please remember to wear your name tag. The way that most public finance courses are organized is like this. They have various kinds of taxes down the row, and regressive, proportional, and progressive taxes. And what they do is they fill in the boxes. Now, usually what they'll do is they'll take one tax at a time. They'll take the income tax and they'll go, what is the effect of an income tax that's regressive, proportional, progressive? What's the effect of a wealth tax that's one of those 3? And they'll go down the line. Every once in a while, what you'll do is you go down the row. You'll say, okay, let's take all these taxes in their regressive form. Let's take them in the proportional form, etc. But no matter how you slice it, that's pretty much what a public finance course is. And that's pretty much what a public finance textbook is, except for one thing, and that is the first session or the first week or the first chapter of the book is usually a justification of taxes. Why should we have taxes in the first place? And the usual reason is because of market failure, namely income redistribution, externalities, and public goods. Those are the market failures that justify taxes. So in the first week or so, they discuss that, and then they discuss what are the effects of all these taxes. Well, before I get to these market failures and why they're erroneous, that's the Austrian view that there ain't no such thing as a market failure, I want to first ask you a trick question. Which is the price system most akin to of these 3? And I'll even put in a fourth one, the poll tax or the head tax. No, the answer is the poll tax or the head tax. What a poll tax is everyone pays the same amount. Or a head tax, everyone pays, say, $100. This was Murray Rothbard's favorite tax. He was such a moderate. He came out in favor of taxes. Well, not to be fair to Murray, he didn't really favor this, but he said if we have to have any tax, let's have a poll tax or a head tax, which means everybody pays the same amount. And if you're poor and you can only pay $10 a year in taxes, well, then everyone has to pay $10 a year and no more. Bill Gates pays $10 a year in taxes, total tax bill. That would be what the price system is akin to, a poll tax or a head tax. Very, very super regressive. Well, look, what does Bill Gates pay for a can of Coke? He pays the same thing as I do, middle class, and he pays the same thing for a guy pushing a broom, lower class. We all pay the same, whatever it is, 38 cents for a can of Coke. So it's a very regressive, the price system is very, very regressive. And if we want to put taxes on a market basis, which is a contradiction because taxes are coercive and markets aren't, but if we want to get as close as we can, we have to favor a poll tax, Murray Rothbard's favorite tax. Let me pull another trick on you before I get into the market failures, and that's the Laffer Curve. Now, what's going on with the Laffer Curve? What the Laffer Curve has over here is tax revenue on this axis and tax rate on this axis. And there are 2 points, A and E. A, if the tax rate is 100%, the government gets no revenue. Because if the government tells you they're going to take everything away from you, you're not going to work in the first place. Okay? And on the other hand, if they give you a tax at 0, again, they'll get nothing. Because if you earn $100,000 a year and the tax rate is 0, well, you pay nothing and they get nothing. So those are 2 points on the Laffer curve. But as you get down from 100 or up from 0, can everyone see this? Should have made it smaller.
You can zoom in.
Oh, okay. How do you... Good? Thank you. Okay, so we have 2 points on the Laffer curve, and then there's another point, C, which is the tax rate that maximizes government revenue. Now, a lot of people criticize Laffer and say, oh, he was advocating that tax rate that maximizes government revenue, but I don't think that's true. He didn't really. He just said, here's a certain curve, and I think it's an interesting curve, and it's certainly used in public finance. The interesting question is, when we go from B to C, or, to put it in another way, suppose we go from a tax rate of 75% to 70%. Is that a good thing? Do we as libertarians, not as Austrians, because as Austrians we're value-free, but as libertarians we're not value-free, do we favor this? And the awkwardness of it is, on the one hand, we sort of viscerally favor lower tax rates, but on the other hand, we don't favor greater government tax takes. And yet, when we move from 75 to 70, if my numbers are correct for illustrative purposes, the government revenues will increase. Well, this is part and parcel of something else. During my rent control discussion, I was talking about the fact that one good thing about rent control, because it lowers property values, it also lowers government revenues, so we sort of favor rent control on that ground. And another one is legalizing drugs, which most libertarians favor. But on the other hand, now they can tax it. So we sort of have to oppose legalization of drugs, or at least there's a conflict. And there's a constant refrain between these 3 things. On the one hand, you favor government doing things that are better, lowering tax rates. On the other hand, they'll get more money, and, we're not too happy about that. So it's a bit of a conundrum. Okay, let me now step into my first market failure, the market failure of income distribution. Somehow they've got it in their minds that absolute income equality is the desiderata, that we should all have the same amount of income, which is a little weird, but what the heck, start with that. And the way they illustrate that is they start with a diagram of relating utils and wealth. And they say that, yes, the more wealth you have, the more utils you have, but the marginal rate, this is a marginal rate, it's at a decreasing rate. In other words, the richer you are, the happier you are, but you're happier at a decreasing rate. Your total utility goes up, but your marginal utility, and this is a marginal utility curve here. Let me make it official. It's a marginal utility curve. The marginal utility is increasing at a decreasing rate. Is that clear? I mean, it's coherent. I don't think it's correct, but there's a certain low cunning to these kind of diagrams. Well, one problem is, what's this utils? Utils schmoodles. Where do we get utils? You can't measure happiness units. You can measure height, you can measure weight, you can measure speed, you can measure acceleration, you can measure all sorts of... Is that better? I don't want to have the Guido fallacy of not being allowed people to see the diagrams. Please, if ever I'm not zooming correctly, help me, and I'll try to adjust. Okay, so there's a problem with utils right off the bat. But once you grant utils, happiness units, well, then we can say that the marginal utility is falling. Okay, so what do we now have? We have this diagram. And what this says is that if you take $1,000 away from a guy who has $100,000, right? He will lose a certain amount of utility, namely the area under the marginal utility curve. Yes? And if you give it, so I'm putting an arrow to the left over here, right? So to indicate that this guy is going from 100,000 to 99,000. On the other hand, I'm putting an arrow to the right over here. Namely, we're taking that $1,000 away from the rich guy and giving it to the poor guy. So the rich guy goes from 100 to 99. The poor guy goes from 7,000 to 8. And given diminishing marginal utility, we can see that there's a pure gain, namely the striped area here. Namely, this guy loses less than this guy gains. This guy gains the area. They both lose or gain the area under the marginal utility curve. But the marginal utility curve is way lower out here than it is over here. So this guy loses less. He loses just this box. This guy gains that big box, and the difference is the striped area. So the striped area is pure social profit, if I can coin that phrase. Namely, if you take money from the rich guy and give it to the poor guy, the rich guy loses less than the poor guy gains. So this is a market failure because the market doesn't do this. The market doesn't take money from rich people and give it to poor people. Look, I realize we're reaching into the depths of depravity here. But this is what they say. This is, honest to goodness, what these maniacs are saying. That it's a market failure, that the government, that the market doesn't redistribute money so that it's equal. Because if they were equal, there'd be no gains from redistribution. Okay, well, there are fallacies here. One fallacy we've already discussed: it's impossible to make interpersonal comparisons of utility. ICU, interpersonal comparisons of utility, are irrelevant, are non-starters, are illogical. There's no way to prove it. It's just ridiculous from the neck up. Another way to prove it is to even assume their own premises. So now what I do is I say, okay, why do the rich and the poor have to be on the same curve? Why can't the rich be on a higher curve? There's nothing in the philosophy of it that precludes this. In other words, they're setting up this thing of diminishing marginal utility, and I'm just taking a reductio ad absurdum. Reductio ad absurdum means you take the same logic that they're employing, and then you carry forward and show that it leads to very silly results. So I'm going to assume, yes, there's marginal utility, and that it's decreasing, fine, and there are utils. But what I'm now going to do is I'm going to take money from the rich, and I'm going to give it to the poor, and I'm going to show that there's a loss. You see, if the rich curve lies above, thank you. See, if the rich curve lies above the poor curve, if we take $1,000 away from the guy with 100,000, we're decreasing an awful lot of utility, and we're only giving this guy, the poor guy, much less, so we're losing the blue striped area. Now, my diagram is just as sensible as their diagram, and they're both using the same logic. Right? So this is sort of a reductio ad absurdum. I'm accepting their premises, and I'm saying, look, even with your crazy premises, that this is a non-starter or a non-flyer or what have you. Okay, the next fallacy that I want to get into is a thing called externalities. Externalities are either positive or negative. Positive externalities or external economies are, I take a shower, and you people benefit, especially the people in the front row. And yet I can't charge you for this, right? I can't go, hey, you guys pay up a little money here because I took a shower 3 weeks ago, and and I smell a lot less than if I hadn't taken a shower 3 weeks ago, so pay up. I can't be billing you for this. Or I smile. See, I just smiled, and I made you all happy, so I could now charge you for it. No. I can't. There's a spillover benefit that I confer on you, and the idea is there'll be too little of this because I can't charge for it. On the other hand, there are external diseconomies or negative externalities. The usual one is smoke pollution, or I don't take a shower, and now I confer upon you negative aspects. So those are the two kinds of externalities. First, let's take the case of the external economy or the positive externality. And what we have here is the situation where you have a supply and demand curve, S and D, and that is the actual amount of stuff produced. Stuff, whatever the stuff is, smiles, showers, cars, who knows, whatever. If there are external benefits, the true benefits are not the D, as in David curve, but rather D prime. Right? Something shifted higher. Is that better? Can everyone see that? Okay. So what we have is the actual amount, say education. Education is said by all these weirdos like Milton Friedman and other mainstream economists that education is a positive benefit, and what we ought to do is and the market will have too little of it. The market will only have the actual amount, this amount. But the optimal amount is the amount that takes into account all the benefits, not just the private benefits, but the public benefits. In other words, I go to school, I get educated, I can get a better job, I can meet a higher class of lady, whatever it is, I'll be more attractive. Those are private benefits. But I'll also be smarter. I'll vote better. I'll be less likely to become a criminal or whatever. And therefore, I will confer benefits on you that I can't charge you for. And therefore, I'll only have X years of education. This is X years, whereas I should have X plus Y years if I were to take into account the full benefits of it. So the market is perverse. The market is failing. The market is not having enough education. Now, in my lecture on rent control, remember I said, where is rent control? It's in the People's Republic of Ann Arbor, Cambridge, wherever there are students, there's rent control. Namely, what I'm trying to do again is a reductio ad absurdum. I'm trying to say, look, I'm taking this education, and education, at least higher education, is negative if you posit that rent control is not a good thing. So if I can turn an external economy into an external diseconomy, or a positive into a negative, or a negative into a positive, it tends to call into question the whole idea. I mean, it's very subjective now. How do you know whether it's positive or negative? It depends upon people's likes and dislikes. Sadomasochists might like more crime, and I'm becoming educated, and therefore I'm less likely to be a criminal. Well, they might say, oh, we don't like that. So you can twist and turn anything like that, and if you can twist and turn anything like that, the whole idea is problematic. This is the idea. Some young lady asked me, would we talk about privatization of anything? Well, here's one example. Suppose we had a private park. The problem with a private park, what I do, I'm in the middle of the South Bronx. And the South Bronx is a real mess. It's got these tenements, and I showed you pictures of that stuff. What I do is I knock down a whole bunch of tenements, 10 acres worth, and I put in a nice little park with a swimming pool and a grass and trees and swings for the kids. And what does that do? Well, I can get private benefits because I can charge people entrance to my park, but there are also external benefits to these little houses over here. What do I do to the value of these little houses by putting in this wonderful park instead of this horrible slum? I increase the value of these houses, do I not? Can I charge them for it? No. I can't say to the neighbors, I can't say, hey, I just put in this park and your housing value just doubled, so give me some money. They'll say, take a hike, jerk. I can't do that. So the argument is we can't have private parks because private parks can't capture they can only capture the private values, they can't capture the public values, among which are the increase in the values of the surrounding houses. Therefore, if we allow private parks, we'll have too few parks because they can only capture the private benefits, they can't capture the spillover benefits. So we have to cross out private parks and put public parks, and then the public parks, we don't have to worry about it because it's the government and it's great. Well, the problem with this is, first of all, if you were an entrepreneur and you were going to knock down 10 acres worth of slums, what would you do with the surrounding area? You'd start buying up that area, right? Because you know that area too will increase in value. And no one else knows you're putting in a park. All they know is you're trying to buy these crummy rat trap houses. So you can capture some of it. Can you capture all of it? Well, maybe not, but perfection is denied us on this side of the Garden of Eden. Right? But you can capture some of these benefits because you have the advantage of, you're the only one who knows where this park is going. So you can start buying up these surrounding houses and then benefit from their increase in value. So the thing is nonsensical. Here is my favorite Murray Rothbard quote about external economies. What it says: A and B often benefit, it is held, if they can force C into doing something. Any argument proclaiming the right and goodness, say, of three neighbors who yearn to form a string quartet, forcing a fourth neighbor at bayonet point to learn to play the viola, is hardly deserving of sober comment. I mean, Murray really wraps it up. What they're really saying is, we want to start this string quartet and we need a viola player, so we're going to come in after you because if you learn how to play the viola, you can help us. You can be an external economy. And he's saying, well, give me a break. That's crazy. And it is. Okay, we now move on to external diseconomies or negative externalities. Okay, now we have the opposite thing. Instead of me doing something that confers benefit on you, I do something that confers a negativity or a cost on you. For example, the usual example of this is, pollution, smoke pollution. We have a supply and demand for manufacturing these podiums. And we have a supply and demand, and we have an actual amount of these podiums. And most of the costs are internal. Like I have to pay for the lumber, I have to pay to buy an insurance policy, I have to pay to buy a factory, I have to pay the workers, I have to pay for screws or ink or not ink, glue or whatever it is that makes this podium. But what I don't have to pay for is the fact that when I make this stuff, there are soot particles that go out into your laundry and onto your lungs, and I don't have to pay for that. Under the free enterprise system, so-called, according to the critics of the market. So, we now have supply and demand. We have the actual number of these things. But if we were to take into account the external costs, the supply curve or the marginal cost curve on which the supply curve is based, predicated upon, is actually higher than the one that I think I face. Namely, if we were to take into account all the costs, not just the land, labor, and capital, which is this curve, but all the costs, namely the difference between these two supply curves, namely the external cost that I'm imposing on you, we would have fewer of these podiums. And now the question is, well, how should we do it? Should we tax it? Pagoo said, yes, we have to tax it. Ronald Coase, who I'll be criticizing in a few minutes, said, no. The so-called free enterpriser, because he was against this tax, we have to have this other cockamamie scheme, and I'll get to that in a minute. But what they both have in common is that they say that there's too much production, just as in the case of external economy, there was too little production. Now there's too much production, we have to tax it, we have to discourage so many podiums so that we can take into account these external costs that we're imposing on other people. Another example of this external cost would be the pig farm. Pig farm is in the blue, but the red the red sort of indicates where the smell pervades. In other words, the farmer just owns the farm surrounding the blue. But in the red area, you can smell the pig farm as well as inside the blue, inside the red. And here you have some house, and this guy's saying, hey, this is an external diseconomy. Or you have this other case, which is the very same diagram, only now it's noise pollution. Right? So it need not be smoke particles. It could be smell. It could be noise. And so here you have an airport. And in the airport, there's plenty of noise, but there's also noise within the whole red area surrounding the airport. And here's some guy who lives there and say, hey, I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't breathe. It's so noisy here. Cut it out. Which joke did I miss? I don't know. Okay, well, you see the fallacy. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm trying to present the idea in a coherent way such that if there were a neoclassical economist standing right here, he would say, yeah, that's roughly what we mean. So I'm trying to be fair. I'm trying to explain the logic behind what they're saying, and it has a certain coherence. You know, even though it's subject to a reductio or ad absurdum or two, but I'm trying to present the thing in a fair way so that an exemplar of this philosophy would say, yes, this is what we mean. And I've now done that. I've tried to explain what an external economy, external diseconomy, a negative externality is, the smoke, pollution, smell, noise, whatever. Now comes my rejection. As an Austrian, I'm now going to criticize this stuff because I think it's nonsense. I don't think there are any market failures. See, the point is that these external diseconomies are trespasses. They're trespassing noise onto people's property or smell onto people's property or soot particles into their lungs. Let me tell you a little story. Bedtime story. Once upon a time, you always have to start once upon a time in a faraway land, long, long ago. There was a spate of pollution cases in the 1830s in the U.S., and typically some little old lady, I love little old ladies, I don't know why, but I'm into little old ladies. And this little old lady came into the court, and what she said was, that there factory is polluting me. I set out my laundry on this line, and when I set it out, it was clean and wet. I came back 2 hours later, it's dry, but now it's dirty, and I have to wash it all over again. Or some farmer would come to the court and said that their factory, or that their railroad has got these, sparks, and it's setting afire my hay stacks, which are 300 feet away from the railroad, because those sparks really fly. And what I want is two things. I want an injunction, I want him to stop it, and I want damages. Now, in the 1830s, we had something like libertarian law. Did the environmental plaintiffs always win? No. But by and large, if you could prove that they actually did it and it came from their factory, you would be able to collect and you'd be able to get an injunction. And then the polluter would have to buy you out. In other words, voluntary pollution would be internalized, the externality would be internalized. If the factory said to the little old lady, look, sorry dear, we're doing this, but we'll give you $100,000, shut up, and she says, okay, I can wash my laundry again. Well, now there's no externality, it's been internalized. So you had the growth of environmental forensics. You know what forensics is. You've seen the CSI movie, the blood and the particles and all sorts of stuff, and semen and what's under your fingernails. The reason they do that is they're trying to find the murderer or the rapist. Look, if we didn't have any law against murder or rape, we'd have no interest in this stuff. The reason we have an interest in this stuff is because we have laws against murder and rape. Well, in those days, in the 1830s, we had an interest in this because the courts were upholding trespass theory of external diseconomies. So it became very important to determine, well, did this soot particle come from this factory or not? And if it did, they would give them an injunction. And to find out if the sparks really did come from this choo-choo train onto the onto the haystacks, and if so, they would get an injunction. And this had very salutary effects. The market would be led by an invisible hand to use anthracite coal, which was cleaner burning than sulfur coal, but cleaner burning but more expensive. In other words, the manufacturer would now have an economic incentive to use clean-burning, more expensive anthracite coal, because if he used the dirty-burning, cheaper sulfur coal, he'd get all sorts of environmental plaintiffs on his back, and that wouldn't work. So the market was sort of working. There was no market failure. The market failure came about later on. We got into the progressive period. We're now talking 1880, 1890, give or take. And who was the number one world-leading imperialist? Great Britain. But we wanted to be number one. And the way to be number one is the next time some little old lady tries to hassle a heavy industry, you say to or the little old lady or to the farmer, you say, yes, they're violating your property rights. Your stinking, lousy, selfish private property rights. We have a more important consideration in the law now. It's called the public good. And what does the public good consist of? The public good consists of allowing these rascals to pollute. Well, now, with this kind of a law, everything is turned around. No more interest in environmental forensics, no more incentive to use anthracite coal. If you did, you were an idiot, because your opponents, your competitors would use the cheaper sulfur-burning coal, and they couldn't be sued anymore because under the new regime, the new legal regime, the courts just wouldn't uphold that. That's the cause of the problem. It's the government that sets itself as the monopoly protector of private property rights, as it did a pretty good job in the 1830s, and then in the 1890s and thereafter, up until about 1960, 1970, when the pollution was very, very bad. Then they had to start with the Clean Air Act. I mean, it illustrates Mises' idea that whenever you have an intervention, it leads to more interventions. They could have said, well, let's turn back the clock to the 1830s. They could have done that in 1960, and then we would have had a free enterprise system, and we wouldn't have had the problem of external diseconomies. So it's not a market failure, it's a government failure. It's a failure of government to uphold private property rights and to defend victims against trespass. Now, how would the problem of the airport be solved? The way that Hoppe and Rothbard and Locke, who are my three main gurus in terms of homesteading theory, would say, what they would say is it depends upon who was there first. If the airport was there first, and it homesteaded runways in here, and it also homesteaded noise rights in the surrounding area, and then you move in, you're coming to the nuisance and tough on you. You have no cause in law. On the other hand, if you were there first, and then they come and start polluting you, well, then you have some cause in law. And the same with the pig farm. It depends upon who was there first. It's the same diagram. I mean, if the pig farm was there first and then you come, you can't object. You can't go to Pittsburgh in 1910 and say, well, I need an oxygen mask to walk around, and I'm going to walk around without an oxygen mask because I'm hoping that the air purity will be that pure that I can get away with that. I mean, you already have iron and steel mills in Pittsburgh. They were there first. Now I get to my man Coase, Ronald Coase. Whenever I say Coase, boo, boo, boo. Okay, good. I feel like an orchestra conductor here. Not an orchestra, a chorus conductor. Okay, so what's going on here? What's going on here is the very famous Sturgis versus Bridgman law court case that he did in his 1960 article on social costs, I think that's the name of it. A very, very famous article. This is the most highly cited article in all of economics. Ronald Coase's article in 1960. Boy, I've unleashed a monster here. Okay, so what happens is there's a doctor who needs quiet to hear patients with a stethoscope, and you have a mechanic over here, and the doctor's office is right here, and there are contiguous houses, or the houses are touching each other, and the mechanic has a machine here that makes noise, and the noise percolates in his own property and also into the doctor's property, but the doctor doesn't complain about it because the doctor's got his office way over at the other end of the building, and everything is hunky-dory, and this goes on for 10, 20 years. Then what happens is that the doctor moves. He moves from one end of his house to the other end of the house, and now he can hear the noise. Right? Is the diagram clear? He now moves right cheek by jowl with the mechanic's machine grinding away, and he can't hear his stethoscope, and he sues the mechanic. Now, how would the Rothbardian answer this? The Rothbardian, Hoppe, and Lockean would answer, well, who was there first? Who homesteaded the noise rights? And the answer is, the mechanic did. He was there for 20 years before the doctor moved. How would Coase answer? This son of, well, we're in a polite society here. Can't say what I feel, but he's pure evil. And yet, I had a full head of hair before I read Coase, and now look at me. I just pull it out by the handful because it's so unjust to call him an advocate of free enterprise. What this economist says is that it depends upon who values the rights more. Who values the rights more? Is it more expensive to move the machine, or is it more expensive for the doctor to move back his office to where he was? In other words, when there's a property rights dispute, you answer it not in terms of who was there first, which is the libertarian answer, but you answer it in terms of, well, if we give the rights to this guy, what will the GDP be? And if we give the rights to that guy, what will the GDP be? And whichever way we go will maximize wealth, because maximizing wealth is the key for the Chicago School. Whichever way maximizes wealth, that's justice. I mean, this is really silly. I must have written maybe 15 articles attacking this. I'm just sort of livid when I think about it. I start writing another article attacking them. Let me give you a few examples. Suppose we're having a debate as to who owns this wallet. Ted over here says he owns it, and I say I own it. Now, it's got a picture of, my family. It's got my license. It's got all sorts of stuff that I've signed. And we go to court. And the judge is not going to look in the past. He's not going to say, well, do you have a receipt for this? Where did you get it from? He's going to say, well, if I give it to Block, what will the GDP be? And I'm a bum. I'll just use it for wine, women, and song. And, I'll just end up drunk in the gutter. Whereas Ted is a ganze Macher, nice guy, very productive. And if he gets the wallet, he'll do good things with it. The goddamn judge will give it to him. I mean, is that appalling or is that not appalling? When, what's his name, the football player, O.J. Simpson, was accused of killing his wife, there were two schools of thought. One school of thought said he did it, and he should go to jail for it. The other school said he didn't do it, and he shouldn't go to jail for it. Thanks to Coase, we have another reductio ad absurdum. Shut up. Can't mess with you people. Thanks to this unnamed economist, we have a third way to go. We can say, yes, he killed her, but he had a right to kill her, because in the zero transactions cost world, I'll get to that in a second, he would have bought her, he would have owned her, and therefore he had a right to kill her. See, for Coase, there are two types of... Boy, I'm not going to mess with you people anymore. Logical consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. In the zero transactions cost world, there are no transactions costs. Therefore, the person who values something more always buys it, gets it. If there's a dispute between over this wallet between me and Ted, whoever values it more gets it. On the other hand, in the high transactions cost world, the transaction might not occur. Think of somebody trying to make a transaction with 10,000 victims of pollution and 100,000 perpetrators of pollution. It's very difficult to make a unanimous agreement. So what Coase is saying is that shut up. He's saying in the real world of high transactions costs, the judge should ignore the high transaction costs and act as if there was a zero transaction cost and world, and give it to the plaintiff or the defendant who, in the zero transactions cost, would have ended up with it. So, hence, he's asking, well, how much does it cost to do this? How much does it cost to do that? And the whole thing is just crazy. Okay, I've now done two. Market failures. I've done income distribution and I've done externalities. How do you internalize someone at lunch, I forget, a young man from South America, see here? There he is, was saying that he started a restaurant 4 years ago and everything was hunky-dory. And then all of a sudden in the last 3 or 4 years, gradually all sorts of establishments moved in and they ruined his restaurant. And how can he protect himself from that? And what he was really doing is saying, well, we have an external diseconomy or a negative externality problem. And how do you solve that? The way you solve that is you privatize the streets. If you privatize the streets, the street owner now has an incentive, if he wants to keep your custom, to make sure that you're doing well. Take the case of the food fair. The food fair tries to get as many different kinds of restaurants as possible and doesn't have two of the same kind, like won't have two different pizza places right next to each other, because the first pizza place will make a contract with the guy saying, I'll be the pizza guy in this food fair. So the way to internalize these things is through free enterprise, and the reason we have these problems is because we have public property. So if we had private property, and if we had a government that protected private property against trespass, the whole externalities, whether positive or negative, would disappear. It's not a market failure, it's a government failure. Okay, let me now move on to the last case. And the last case is a thing called public goods. And what are public goods? I wish this would zoom more. It zooms one way, but, well, I'll push it up a little when I get there. What a public good is another market failure. And now what I'm going to do is going to leave off my Austrian hat for a moment and take on my neoclassical hat and try to explain what a public good is in a way that an advocate of this would say, yes, you've explained it fairly, and then I'll try to criticize it. So, a public good consists of two things, excludability and rivalrousness. Excludability and rivalrousness. What's excludability? Excludability is, can you exclude non-payers from enjoying the thing? Well, in the case of wristwatches or pizza, yes, if I'm chewing on a piece of pizza and Joshua over here comes and grabs it away, I'll call the cop. So I can exclude him. He can't just grab my pizza out of my mouth that I bought and paid for. So we can exclude things like hamburgers and wristwatches and socks and shoes and hats and clothing and cars and stuff. If someone steals my car, I'll call the cops. It's not a perfect excludability. Sometimes robbers get away with it, but in nice neighborhoods, criminality is 1% and they catch some of them. So you can pretty much exclude non-payers from enjoying the property rights in question. But what about a crowded street? Think Broadway and, 42nd Street in New York City, where there are just thousands of people walking. What the mainstream economists will say is, it's either impossible to exclude non-payers. What are you going to do? See if anyone paid to be on that sidewalk? It'd be just so cumbersome or so expensive that for all intents and purposes, it's impossible to exclude them. Okay, so I've now explained excludability, and I've explained the first two, boxes. Now let me look at excludability in the next two boxes. Is it possible to exclude people from watching TV? And the answer is yes. What you can do is beam out the TV show, and then break it up, and then sell people a descrambler. So you can exclude them. Is it possible to exclude them? Yes, it's possible to exclude them. Right? And now the fourth one, the two examples there are defense and the lighthouse. Is it possible to exclude people from the benefit of a lighthouse or streetlights? And the answer coming from that quarter is no. Because if I turn on the lighthouse, every ship around there, whether you've paid me to be your lighthouse person or not, you are defended by the lighthouse. I can't sort of pick and choose and say, okay, people on this side of the room, you all paid me so you can see the lighthouse, but you guys, you dirty rats, you didn't pay me, so I'm not going to let you see the lighthouse. If I put the lighthouse on, everyone sees it. Similarly, the neoclassicals will say with national defense. If I say that I'm going to lob one into the men's room in the Kremlin, if those Ruskies mess with us, I'll be defending everyone in the country, right? I just can't say, well, you see, this is why we can't make defense private. Because if we make it private and only the people who paid me pay me, there'll be free riders. There'll be other people who didn't pay me who will be protected by my nuclear umbrella anyway. Just as the non-payers of the lighthouse will be protected by the lighthouse, whether they paid or not. Okay, so I've now explained excludability in the 4 blocks, and now I want to talk about rivalrousness. What's rivalrousness? Rivalrousness is it the case that if I have the pizza, you can't have the pizza, which makes it rivalrous? So pizza is rivalrous. And a crowded street is also rivalrous because if you're on the street, you slow me down, right? Or if you're on the highway, and there's a lot of cars. Now, if it's 3 a.m. and there's a car every half mile, then there's no rivalrousness. You can get one more guy on and he's not slowing anyone down. But in the ordinary day on Magnolia Street out here, you add one more car and the street is rivalrous, or it adheres to the concept of rivalrousness, because when you add more cars, it slows down the other cars, so it imposes costs on them. There are marginal costs that are positive. That's why I have that MC there. Well, what about this over here? Is television rivalrous? And the answer is no. The people on this side of the aisle have paid to watch my TV show, and now you guys start watching it. Did you decrease the quality of the picture of them? No, you didn't. So it's not rivalrous. Do you get it? Rivalrous means that when I use it, I slow you down or impose costs on you. The marginal cost here is 0 because it's not rivalrous. And the same thing with defense and the lighthouse. If I have a lighthouse to protect the people who are my patrons, who have paid me to put on the lighthouse, and now other people, you people on this aisle, you start looking at the lighthouse. Did you detract from their lighthouse ability to look at? I'm being a little awkward here. Did you detract from their ability to look at the lighthouse? No. So the lighthouse is not rivalrous, nor is national defense. If I say I'm going to protect these people with the nuclear umbrella, you people get in under it for free. You're free riders. There's no rivalrousness about that. Okay, so I've now explained excludability, I've given examples, I've explained rivalrousness, and now I come to the conclusion of this analysis. The analysis is that this is a private good. Pizza, hamburgers, socks, hats, they're both, yes, you can exclude, and yes, they're rivalrousness, and we economists of the neoclassical persuasion have no trouble with this quartet, or this box, this quarter of the diagram. However, if there's either no excludability or non-rivalness, then you have a semi-public good, and if there's both, then you have a pure public good. Namely, the market cannot produce this at all, and the market should not produce these things because of inefficiency or inability. Now, for most economists, don't think that it's a quarter, namely that 3/4 of all goods and services in the GDP should be nationalized. For most economists, and economists are much more free enterprise than sociologists or, historians or any of the other people. For most economists, this would be 90% of stuff. These would be exceptions. Now, for the leftist economists, or for other people who use this public goods argument, there would be less of this and more of these things. Okay? So I hope now that I've done justice to this concept of public goods, and you people who've had this before from straight professors hopefully can assure me or agree that I've now explained it reasonably well, and that's the public goods argument. That's why we must not privatize defense or lighthouses and TVs and crowded streets. Another way to illustrate this is just with streets. And what you have here is, if it's crowded, whether it's a highway or a street, you should exclude. So it is rivalrous. And if it's empty, then there's no rivalrousness, whether it's a highway or a street. So much for the rows, or rather the columns. Now for the rows. Can you exclude? Well, yes. In the highway, you can exclude because it's a limited entry, right? And you can have pay highways, right? I mean, every 3 miles there's an entrance or an exit. The New Jersey Turnpike, for example, is a highway, and you can exclude. Whereas if it's a street, what are you going to do? Put up a meter every 10 feet? Every little old lady can collect a penny or 1/1,000,000th of a penny as you go by? What they're saying is that can't be. So this is just a different way of illustrating the theory. Okay, now that I've illustrated the theory, let me move to some criticisms of it. First of all, this business of here we go. This business of costs. For the Austrian economists, and even for the mainstream economists, the essence of cost is opportunity or alternative costs. And in the first chapter of most textbooks, that's the way they talk about costs. And for an alternative or an opportunity cost, it's the next best thing you could have been doing had you not been doing what you're now doing. And nobody knows what anyone's costs are. For example, you people are all sitting here. What's the next best thing you could have been doing? I don't know. It could have been sleeping. It could have been driving a car, swimming, walking, talking amongst yourselves, going to dinner, whatever it is. I'm never going to know. None of you are going to know about each other. So this idea of, whether something is a greater or less than zero cost is highly problematical. In the first chapter, they talk about alternative and opportunity costs that way, and yet they start drawing cost curves, which I'll say a lot about when I do my monopoly theory because it depends crucially on cost curves. But where do you get cost curves? Cost curves are objective. So that's one criticism of this. Nobody knows anyone's costs in the Austrian view. A second one is, again, a little bit of an attempt at a reductio ad absurdum. We'd have to nationalize a lot more than these people think. For example, there are empty seats back there. This place is only 3/4 full. Getting back to their view of cost, what is the cost of somebody else coming in and filling one of those seats? Zero. Right? If they're well behaved, they'll just sit there and shut up and not boo me all the time. Well, kidding about that. So any institution that has less than 100% capacity has to be nationalized. Well, hotels. Do hotels have 100% capacity? No. Let's say they have 90% capacity, and let's ignore just the fact of changing the sheets, which have some costs, presumably. You ought to be able to get into a hotel for free. And if you could get into a hotel for free, then a private hotelier can't run it. I mean, you can't make any money if everyone comes in for free. So what I'm trying to say is that whenever there are vacancies, whenever there's less than full capacity, there's no rivalrousness. There's no rivalrousness for that seat right there between Eric and, what's your name?
Eric.
Oh, 2 Erics. There are 2 Erics there, and there's a seat right between them, and there's no rivalrousness for that seat. If somebody takes it, it doesn't mean that someone else can't have it because there's no one sitting there. The next guy coming through the room can sit there. So we shouldn't be able to charge for economic lectures. Universities shouldn't be able to charge. Hotels shouldn't be able to charge. Apartment houses, office buildings, circuses, concerts, ball games. I was watching a ball game the other day. There were empty seats there. They shouldn't be able to charge according to this crazy thing, according to this crazy idea. Okay, now take pizza, where we say the marginal costs are greater than zero. Once you see, ex ante pizza or hamburgers, yes, there's rivalrousness. But once I produce 100 hamburgers and now I'm trying to sell them, there's no more rivalrousness. The costs might even be negative because I'll have to throw them away if I can't sell them. So even this quadrant can't be privatized. So we're going a little too far. Let me try the lighthouse. My colleague Bill Barnett and I have written about 3 or 4 articles on the lighthouse, attacking, well, I won't mention his name because you'll start booing, but that guy begins with a C, ends with an E, and he's a Chicago professor, Nobel Prize winner. What we say is, and here again to answer your question, can we privatize things? Well, can we privatize the lighthouse? Look, suppose I want to have a private lighthouse, and I know that you guys will pay for it and you guys won't. I now have a credible threat to you guys. I can say one of these days, I don't know when, but one of these days, it's going to be sort of semi-cloudy, and I can tell the silhouette of their ships, and I can tell the silhouette of every ship. And one of these days, I'm going to get you, mothers, and I'm going to shut the lighthouse off when you're there and none of my clients are there. And that's a credible threat. And you're going to have to pay your sailors a lot more money because now it's hazard pay. They're going to say, why should I work on your ship? Because Block, the lighthouse owner, has a credible threat that he's going to shut the thing off and we're going to end up on the rocks and all killed. I might as well work for these guys for a little less money. National defense. Well, here we get into the mother of all, what do you call it, services, national defense. That's the last holdout for the anarchist. I mean, most people who are minarchists are saying, well, yes, we can have markets in this and we can have markets in post office, but you really need the government to have defense. Well, there are problems here. One problem is, the argument is we need a government to defend us against the Russians or whoever the bad guy de jure. Nowadays the Russians are okay, but it's somebody else. It's hard to keep track because they keep changing the bad guy. I'm not sure. The Canadians maybe. No. I'm just kidding. They're trying to take over this country. I heard them plotting. One argument against national government is that it implies world government, because if you need a national government to keep 2 citizens from each other's throats, well, what about the relationship of, say, China and Portugal, or Brazil and Australia? If you need a national government to keep local citizens off of each other's necks, don't you need a world government to keep countries off of each other's necks? And yet we don't have a world government, and most people reject world government, so that's a difficulty. Another one. If I had a private defense agency, and again, the people on this side of the aisle all subscribe to it. And what I do is I give them a little sign like this, and I say, okay, the bloc forces will protect you, whether from local bad guys or from Ruskies or Iranians or whoever the bad guy is. Now, if you guys fake this, you're guilty of fraud, and I can get you for that. But what I could do is I could go to the terrorists, T-E-R-R-A-ists, and say that I'm going to protect anyone with this sign, which is why it's very important that everyone wear their name tag, because if you don't, I'm not going to protect you. And I can say, you guys are fair game as far as I'm concerned. Hint, hint. It's a little, suggestibility that, you guys are pacifists, you don't want to pay me to protect you, or you don't want to pay anyone to protect you. Well, you're at risk. Now, suppose that people in Massachusetts are all a bunch of hippie dippies, and they don't know from defense. There's just 1 or 2 of them that are pretty good, but most of them are, just hippies. Whereas the people in good old Texas, that they wear sidearms and they'll pay for defense. What I could do is tell the Iranians, look, have at the Massachusettsians. But you mess with a Texan and, you're in trouble with me. Is this a credible threat? Yeah, it's sort of credible threat. It doesn't have to be a perfect threat. I just won't take any customers in Massachusetts because I think there'll be too few of them. And yes, there'll be a few free riders in Texas that take advantage of this. But in order to make a going concern, I don't have to get every jot and tittle out of it, right? I mean, perfection is denied us on the wrong side of the Garden of Eden. So what I'm trying to say is that this market failure, this public goods, this attack on free enterprise lighthouses, free enterprise defense, free enterprise, lots of other things, is not a tenable thing. It's subject to reductios ad absurdum. It's subject to the problem of alternative costs, which is subjective, as the Austrians say. They're not objective, as the neoclassicals will say. I'm out of time. Thanks for your attention.